Slang surrounds us. We see it on posters, in movies, in songs, and sometimes our books. Most importantly, we hear from others, and from then on, the English language develops. But the question remains, is slang a positive or a negative influence on the English language?
Okay, well, slang is informal language, and it's noted for its sociological background. The need for slang. Need for slang comes from sort of groups that are out of power. There's a lot of debate. There are essentially two camps. One group calls themselves the descriptivists, and the descriptivists are essentially people who make dictionaries, linguists, academics. And they look at language and say, language changes, and that's a fact, and there's nothing we can do to change that. And then there's another group called the prescriptivists, and they're the ones that say that language change is language decay, and we want to preserve the form of language as long as we can. And I'm from the first camp, the descriptivist, that says that language changes, there's not much we can do about it, and that all these changes are compensated for. Language maintains an equilibrium over time.
In the battleground between formality and informality, we've taken the side that language develops, and we believe slang plays an integral, positive role in the evolution of English. So let's take a look at what students believe, the very people who drive the development of language.
Slang is the source of innovation in any language. Yes, it sounds crude. Yes, it sounds rudimentary. But when it becomes universal, there's this canonizing quality to that. And then that'll cause that to be part of that language, and the language then continues to push to a new age. It adapts to the needs that the humans go through as we get into the modern age, as we get into a post-industrial society, so on and so forth.
The language develops all the time, and slang is just another way of developing this.
This is what I like to say from my slang. I don't know what he like to say. You know, everybody got different slangs, so it really doesn't come from music, it really doesn't come from whatever. It just comes from your own brain or whatever, however you want to express yourself.
Let's take a look at a specific word to understand slang's effect on English. Swag. Swag is the appearance or style in which someone presents him or herself. Used in a sentence.
Turn my swag on.
Swag or swagger originates from the manner in which sailors swayed from side to side on ships, and since then, it has found its way into 21st century English. Swag is a perfect example of how English is simplified and streamlined, and how it makes communication easier between groups of people. Now, let's take a look at how some teachers feel it affects the classroom setting.
I feel like slang is sort of negative because we kind of end up deviating away from proper English, and speaking as a teacher especially, I feel like students tend to just apply slang into papers and stuff, and so that's kind of a negative side I see to it.
Slang is very much tied to a generation, and slang gives a generation an identity, but also because I come from a much further back generation than my students, sometimes I don't understand their slang, or sometimes they don't understand mine, and so it can create some communication confusion. It's quickly remedied, but it can cause some problems.
So slang does have its drawbacks, but in terms of assisting learning and helping students understand the old, new words play an integral role. Thus, for educational purposes, slang is invaluable and necessary.
Definitely think slang does unite students. I think that brings students and teenagers together and has something that unites them.
Because it helps the students feel more comfortable in the room and more accepting of trying to think about new concepts and learn new ideas if they're using a language that they're comfortable with. They're also more likely to participate in class discussions if they don't feel like they have to be so formal all the time. Language is such an organic thing, and language is constantly growing and developing and changing. New words are coming and going all the time. And I think that's just the nature of language, to have slang and to have new words that are created. In some ways, if slang were to disappear, maybe our language should soon become dead. You know, maybe we're no longer evolving once we stop playing with language.
Used responsibly in both social and classroom settings, slang can be a great tool in giving students a vested interest in developing their language. Using a direct example from classical literature, we can demonstrate how slang streamlines information and makes it easier to understand. Chapter 18,
Nathaniel Hawthorne's Scarlet Letter. The stigma gone, Hester heaved a long, deep sigh, in which the burden of shame and anguish departed from her spirit. Oh, exquisite relief! She had not known the weight until she had felt the freedom. By another impulse, she took off the formal cap that confined her hair, and down it fell upon her shoulders, dark and rich, with at once a shadow and a light in its abundance, and imparting the charm of softness to her features. Translated, with nobody on her back, Hester sighed and chilled out. It felt good. She didn't know what she didn't have until she had it. Feeling frisky, she undid her weave, and her shiny black hair slumped on her shoulders, looking hot. 37 words shorter.
Slang has been present. Slang is a language of variety that's always present. And so yesterday's slang becomes today's more formal language. Linguists don't have a way to predict what language will become formalized, but we can look back at the 1950s and see words like broad for woman and gam for leg, and these terms now have sort of a long acceptance in the language, and they still are considered somewhat informal, but they have been integrated into the language. We can say that whenever there are outside groups, say youth or even rap culture today, there's a lot of variety of terms that come from these areas that will become formalized. So in the past, we can look at a word like cool, which is used by everyone today, pretty much. At once it was sort of an isolated phenomenon under in a particular group of, used by a particular group of speakers. There's no way to predict what slang will be like in the future. African Americans have a dialect that say that it will exist because it fills the sociological English variety that we're accustomed to in the United States. Among its features are what some people would call slang vocabulary, but vocabulary often with the meaning is opposite of what its traditional meaning is. It also includes certain kind of grammatical differences, like the deleted copula, lack of the verb to be in certain areas. There are also intonation differences which help give more expressivity to the language.
When considering slang in the context of English, we have to consider the phenomenon of Ebonics. Ebonics developed among the African American minorities, especially in the more impoverished districts of big cities. It not only has its own slang, but a unique grammatical structure. What we're witnessing is the development of a new dialect of English. Some people see it as a bastardization of language and a symbol of illiteracy, and according to Richard Wright of the Journal of Negro Education, it makes it harder to teach English amongst impoverished minorities. But what's important is that to anyone with a sympathetic ear, it makes sense, and it's the most streamlined the English language has ever been, short of George Orwell's Newspeak in 1984. Ebonics is mainstream English brought into the 21st century, and it will likely drive its development in music, literature, and film.
Given that language is a means of communication and nothing more, no word has any other value other than the fact that it's communicating something, there's no real relevance in saying that, oh, slang is, like unsophisticated English or something, because as long as it's communicating the message, it really doesn't matter no matter what you use. You can be like, I ain't got nothing or something, but you understand what I'm trying to say. So as long as that's the case, it shouldn't matter. So I think slang's great. I think it makes things easier.
We can see that slang is here to stay. We aren't going to know what the English language will look like in 100 or even 10 years, but we do know slang moves it in the right direction. What's important is every individual's participation in developing English. So go ahead, say you've got swagger, or better yet, create your own new words and add to this wonderful language.
I ain't dead, no, I ain't done, no, I ain't scared, I ain't run, still I stand.